Like and subscribe right now, or this spider is gonna crawl on your face while you're sleeping.
10 dumbest prison escape plans that actually worked. Prisons are all about keeping people inside, but every now and again, folks find their way out. It happens more often than you might think, but nevertheless, there are some institutions touting as being inescapable, such that there's no conceivable way for anyone to escape. The only problem is that people inevitably do escape from these very same prisons. While the filthy rich drug lords of cartels have their workers dig tunnels for them to escape, others came up with rather more unique plans. And some of those plans, despite being as silly and insane as they sound, do work quite brilliantly. From the Shawshank Redemption to Chicken Run, there have been dozens of films throughout the years that showed the intricate planning and sheer bravado required to break out of prison. Unfortunately, many of the escapees in the real world are ruthless murderers and armed robbers, but that doesn't make their daring escapes any less amazing. Anyway, here's the 10 dumbest prison escapes that actually worked. Number 10. 5 years in a North Vietnamese prison camp. The Vietnam War was long, brutal, and, according to many, completely unnecessary. But whatever the reasons for going into the conflict, the men and women on the ground often displayed amazing perseverance. In August 1967, Major Bud Day was flying over North Vietnam when his plane was shot down. Seeing his parachute, the North Vietnamese already had their guns drawn when he landed. He endured several days of torture, and on his 5th day in the prison camp, Day made his escape. He wriggled out of the ropes that bound his hands and took off into the unforgiving jungle. Well, he did plan his escape, but the plan following his escape was not well thought of. He had broken his arm in the plane crash and was blind in one eye, but he stumbled doggedly onward, hiding in the mud, sometimes for an hour whenever a Vietnamese patrol came too close. For days, he pressed on, eating berries and live frogs to survive. After more than 2 weeks, he had made it to within a few miles of a U.S. Army base when a Viet Cong patrol stumbled across him and shot him in the leg. This time, there was no escape, and he spent the next 5 years in captivity before he was eventually released. Before we move on, I've got a little challenge for you that will take just 5 seconds to complete. So here's the deal. You just leave a like on this video, smash that subscribe button, and hit the notification bell and you get 25 years of amazing luck. Try it. It really works. Number 9. Escaping a Gestapo fortress. When Nazi Germany occupied France in 1940, a former school teacher turned infantryman went underground with the resistance. That man was André de Vigny, and he served as a liaison to the British Special Operations Executive before joining a network that helped refugees get across the border into Switzerland. In April 1943, a Nazi mole in the network got de Vigny arrested by the Gestapo. De Vigny was sent to Montluc prison, hell on earth for anti-Nazi freedom fighters. He was personally tortured by Klaus Barbie, one of the most brutal men to ever walk on 2 legs. For 4 months, de Vigny was kept handcuffed in a small, dark cell between macabre torture sessions at Barbie's hands. On August 20th, Barbie told de Vigny that he would be executed in a few days. Luckily, de Vigny hadn't been idle. He'd learned early on that he could pick his handcuffs with a safety pin, and he'd planned an escape route by lifting his cell's wooden floorboards with a concrete-sharpened spoon. He and a fellow inmate escaped at night, killing a guard as they left their cells. Then they took a makeshift grappling hook, made from twisted bed sheets and a lamp, and swung across a 4.5-meter gap to freedom. After making it to Switzerland, de Vigny immediately rejoined the resistance that was right beside the Allied foot soldiers when they took back southern France in 1944. Number 8. 475 Taliban escaped from an Afghan prison. Sarposa prison is reserved almost entirely for high-risk criminals, such as Taliban militants. In April 2011, the massive prison held over 500 Taliban prisoners within its walls. It's supposed to be one of the most secure prisons in the country, but that claim proved less than solid when around 475 prisoners escaped through a massive tunnel under the prison walls. The entire underground structure was over 100 meters long and was equipped with concrete shoring, electricity, and ventilation shafts. Like many of these stories, the real work came from outside the prison. Work on the tunnel began months before the breakout in a small rented house nearby. Early in the morning on April 25th, the tunnel broke through the prison floor, and hundreds of Taliban dropped through one by one, a process that took hours. Only about 40 of the prisoners have since been found. Number 7. Seamus Toomey's IRA Rescue Squad. As the chief of staff for the provincial IRA, Seamus Toomey was not a very nice guy. He joined the paramilitary group in the 30s, and by the early 70s, he was the commanding officer of their Belfast Brigade. On July 21, 1972, the brigade detonated 19 bombs throughout the city, injuring 130 people and killing 11, all designs set in motion by Toomey. His violent machinations caught up with him, however, and he was arrested in 1973. After he was convicted, Toomey was trucked off to Mountjoy Prison, Ireland's largest penitentiary, but the IRA isn't known for letting their officers rot in a cell. The same month he was incarcerated, the prison descended into turmoil when a hijacked helicopter roared into the exercise yard. Seconds later, it was airborne again with Toomey safely aboard. A month later, Toomey returned to prison, captured during a high-speed chase in Dublin. Should have stuck with the helicopter rather than the roads, eh? Number 6. Drifting at sea for 7 months. As part of their Pacific campaign during World War II, Japanese forces took over dozens of small islands. One of these was a tiny rock called Ocean Island, or Banaba Island, and it kick-started one of the most incredible survival stories to come out of the war. Originally from the island of Nikunau, Nabateri was 22 years old when he traveled to Ocean Island to work in the phosphate mines in 1942. He had no idea the island lay directly in the path of the Japanese war machine. Soon enough, Japanese troops landed on the island and shipped most of the workers and inhabitants to various mainland camps. They selected about 100 people to stay and work on the island to provide them with food, choosing Nabateri because he was a skilled fisherman. The island became a large, isolated prison. Over time, the Japanese troops figured out how to fish and run the farms on their own, at which point they ordered the workers to start digging their own graves. Under the dead of night, Nabateri and 5 other young men made their escape. They piled into 3 tiny canoes and set out for the Gilbert Islands, nearly 400 kilometers away. In just a couple of days, 2 canoes disappeared in the ruthless seas, and Nabateri's mate died at sea right in front of him. For the next 7 months, Nabateri drifted across the open ocean, alone, except for the fish. He ate what he could catch, and he drank when it rained. Eventually, the canoe washed ashore on Inigo Island, 2,400 kilometers from Ocean Island. Nabateri collapsed on the sand and crawled along the waterline until several locals spotted his withered form struggling in the surf. He made a complete recovery. Number 5. Impersonating a Nazi soldier. Colditz Castle is a literal fortress, a bastion in the heart of Germany, built on the edge of a sheer 75-meter cliff. Its walls are 2 meters thick, and during World War II, it was 400 miles from anything not under the shadow of a swastika. This was where British officer Harry Nave found himself imprisoned in 1941. Colditz Castle was a relatively pleasant place for a Nazi prison camp. It was an officer's prison, and the inmates were treated with a modicum of respect. But a golden prison is still a prison, and Nave decided to escape. It had never been done before, and Nave wasn't immediately successful. Despite failing his first attempt, Nave tried again. This time, with the help of an accomplice, a fellow prisoner, the 2 donned fake German uniforms. Instead of walking out the front door, though, they crawled through the ceiling and came out in a guardhouse near the fortress's perimeter. On foot and by train, they traveled nearly 400 miles southeast across Germany, sleeping where they could and evading search parties the whole time. They crawled across the Swiss border, then made their way through France and Spain, finally setting foot on British soil nearly 4 months after leaving their prison. Number 4. Tunneling through a German POW camp. While most escape stories involve criminals breaking out after being rightfully incarcerated, in the most inspirational ones, prisoners of war escape harsh detention camps. On March 28, 1918, Lieutenant Cecil Malfeas was captured by a German patrol after his plane went down behind enemy lines. He landed in the land-shut POW camp in Bavaria and soon began collaborating with a fellow inmate, Lieutenant Oscar Thomas Flight. Their plan would be dangerous but simple. They were going to tunnel out. For nearly half a year, the 2 prisoners painstakingly scraped their way beneath the camp, picking at the dirt with forks and spoons. To get far enough past the fence, the tunnel had to be 30 meters or 100 feet long, which meant depositing of a lot of dirt. The 2 men took turns filling their pockets with loose soil, then strolling to let it sift through holes in their pockets and down their pant legs. As summer turned into fall, the tunnel became tantalizing close to completion. Unfortunately, the story has no happy ending. On September 8th, German soldiers stormed the camp and informed the prisoners that they were doing an inspection, and they only searched Flight's room. Someone must have talked. The tunnel was found, and Fez and Flight were shoved into an isolation tank for 11 days. They spent the rest of the war in Landshut. Number 3. The man who mailed himself out of jail. While robbing a grain elevator in 1987, Richard Lee McNair was arrested and later charged for murder, attempted murder, and burglary. McNair was 29 at the time, but his real career was just beginning. Immediately after his arrest, he greased up his handcuffs with lip balm and sprinted out of a North Dakota County jail. With officers hot on his tail, McNair took off on foot through the city of Minot, leading his pursuers on a high-speed foot race that ended in McNair falling out of a tree into the waiting arms of the law. His next home was the North Dakota State Penitentiary, but the increased security was only a speed bump for McNair. In 1992, he crawled through a ventilation duct and went on the run for 9 months. McNair's escapades got him moved into federal custody, where he languished in maximum security prisons for over a decade. It wasn't until 2006, a short while after being transferred to a penitentiary in Pollock, Louisiana, that McNair got another chance to escape, and this one went down in history. Part of McNair's job at the Pollock prison was repairing torn mailbags, and over the course of months, he planned an escape that nobody would see coming. He was going to mail himself out. One fine day, he curled up in a handmade pod on a shipping pallet that was covered in old mailbags. The pallet was shrink-wrapped and taken to a nearby warehouse. McNair waited in the pod for hours, baking in the Louisiana heat and breathing through a thin cardboard tube that he shoved through the bottom of the pallet. When the warehouse guards left for lunch, McNair sliced his way to freedom and strolled out of the warehouse. He evaded recapture for over a year, despite several close encounters. Number 2. Hitching a helicopter ride. In 1985, 20-year-old James Rodney Leonard was serving a life sentence for murder in a South Carolina penitentiary. The maximum security prison was supposed to be escape-proof, but Leonard didn't play by the rules. On December 19th, a young woman named Joyce Maddox chartered a helicopter at a nearby airstrip. As it lifted into the air, Maddox pulled a handgun out of her purse and forced the pilot to fly to the prison. Back in the prison yard, 200 inmates were out for their daily exercise. As the helicopter approached, 5 of them broke out of the crowd and ran for the chopper. But there was a problem. A small aircraft was only designed to hold 3 people. So, Leonard shoved 2 of the prisoners onto the ground and climbed in along with Jesse Smith and Willem Bellew, both of whom were doing time for armed robbery. Still overloaded with 5 passengers, the pilot did his best to take off. By then, the guards had declared open season on the chopper, and a hail of bullets were heading their way. Maddox returned fire, but their only chance was making it out of the prison yard. As bullets zinged off the metal frame, the tiny Hughes 300C struggled through its treacherous climb to 3.5 meters, the height of the prison fence. The skids practically scraped the barbed wire as the helicopter went over, and the 3 escapees tasted freedom. But they were quickly picked up and sentenced to kidnapping, air piracy, assault, and conspiracy in addition to their previous sentences. Number 1. Breaking out with a peach grenade. For months, Nadine Vaugeot had been taking private helicopter flying lessons. Her husband, Michel, was incarcerated in Paris's La Sante prison, a penitentiary reserved for hardened criminals, and Nadine was planning a daring, high-profile escape that would release Michel well before his 27-year sentence was up. On May 26, 1986, the escape plan unfolded in front of hundreds of stunned inmates. Minutes before the helicopter arrived, Michel Vaugeot forced his way past guards and onto the prison roof using a fake gun and a peach painted to look like a grenade. Nadine showed up in the helicopter as planned, flying low over the roof while gunmen leaped out and opened fire on the approaching guards. Michel hoisted himself onto the helicopter skids, followed by the gunmen, and the trio took to the skies as the prison guards fired helplessly at the receding helicopter. Minutes later, they touched down in a nearby soccer field and climbed into a waiting car. A few months later, Michel Vaugeot surfaced again during a botched bank robbery. He was shot in the head and taken to the hospital. Afterward, he was on to serve the remainder of his sentence. He was released in 2003 after serving a total of 27 years in prison, 17 of which were spent in solitary confinement.